The mirror doesn't lie, but sometimes it reveals more than just our appearance. Victoria Wellington stared at her reflection in horror, her trembling hands reaching toward what remained of her once beautiful silver hair. The acrid smell of chemicals still burned her nostrils as she took in the patchy, scorched wasteland that had replaced 40 years of careful grooming. Chunks of hair littered the floor around chair number 3, like fallen leaves, each strand a small death. "Oh my God," whispered a client from across the salon, her voice cutting through the suffocating silence. Behind Victoria, 20 pairs of eyes watched in fascination and horror. Some clients covered their mouths in shock, others fumbled for their phones. Tragedy had always been entertainment for the cruel. A few were actually smiling, finding perverse pleasure in watching an old woman's dignity crumble in real time. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Wellington." Brianna's voice dripped with manufactured concern, but Victoria caught the triumphant gleam in her eyes through the mirror's reflection. It must have been a reaction to the new perm solution. These things happen, you know, especially with mature hair that's been processed for so many years. The words hit like physical blows. Mature hair, processed, clinical terms designed to make her feel like a specimen rather than a woman. Victoria's chest tightened, each breath a struggle against the weight of humiliation pressing down on her. In 82 years of life, through the Korean War letters that broke her heart, through miscarriages that nearly destroyed her soul, through watching Harold waste away from cancer, she had never felt so utterly diminished. She stood slowly, her arthritic joints protesting, and removed the pink cape that had covered her dignity. As she walked toward the door, she heard Brianna's voice behind her. "Next time, maybe consider something more age-appropriate. The grey pixie cut is very popular with ladies your age." Laughter followed her out into the harsh afternoon sun. Victoria Wellington had been coming to this salon for 30 years. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her story here began long before her first appointment, and it was about to end in ways that would destroy more than just hair. 6 months earlier, the ritual never changed. Every Thursday at 2 p.m. sharp, Victoria Wellington would push through the glass doors of Eternal Beauty Salon, her vintage Hermès purse clutched in hands that had once signed million-dollar charity checks. Chair number 3 had been hers for 3 decades, positioned by the window where she could watch the seasons change over Maple Street, where she'd witnessed the neighborhood transform from residential elegance to commercial bustle. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Wellington," Martha would greet her, the warmth in her voice genuine after all these years. Martha Chen had been styling Victoria's hair since the Carter administration, back when the salon was called Elizabeth's and occupied half the space it did now. She understood that Victoria's weekly appointment wasn't merely about beauty, it was about maintaining a connection to the woman she used to be. Victoria wasn't like the other elderly clients who filled the air with complaints about medications and absent grandchildren. She carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had once moved through rooms full of senators and Supreme Court justices, back when her late husband Harold had been one of the most influential federal judges on the East Coast. Her silver hair, naturally thick and lustrous even at 82, was always styled in a classic French twist that had graced her head through 5 decades of Washington dinner parties. Her nails were painted the same shade of rose pink she'd worn since 1963, the year she'd married Harold, and learned that presentation wasn't vanity, it was armor. "The usual, dear?" Martha would ask, though they both knew the routine by heart. Gentle shampoo with expensive products Victoria purchased herself, careful conditioning, precision setting, and finally the styling that transformed her from ordinary old woman into the elegant matriarch she'd always been. Martha never rushed, never suggested improvements or trendy updates. She understood that Victoria's style wasn't about fashion, it was about identity, about holding on to the last visible pieces of a life that had mattered. But Martha's arthritis grew worse each year, and when her daughter convinced her to move to Arizona for the dry climate, Victoria knew something precious was ending. Martha's last day was a Friday in April, unseasonably cold with threatening clouds that seemed to mirror Victoria's mood. "You take care of yourself, Mrs. Wellington," Martha had said, tears in her eyes as she cleaned out her station. "This place won't be the same without you." "Nor I without it," Victoria replied, though she had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. The new stylists arrived like an invasion of youth and modernity. 5 women, none older than 25, each one seemingly determined to drag eternal beauty kicking and screaming into the Instagram age. Brianna Kowalski, the ringleader, had cotton candy pink streaks in her dark hair and enough facial piercings to trigger every metal detector in a 3-block radius. OMG, who actually requests finger waves in 2024? Victoria heard her whisper to her colleagues during her first appointment with the new staff. It's like a museum exhibit walked in and asked for a makeover. The other girls giggled. Ashley with her rainbow nail art, Madison with her undercut and full-sleeve tattoos, Destiny with her lip fillers and constant phone usage, and Caitlin, who seemed incapable of speaking without using the word literally, at least twice per sentence. Victoria sat in chair number 3, pretending not to hear while Brianna worked through her hair with obvious distaste. The younger woman's technique was competent but cold, mechanical movements devoid of Martha's gentle care. "You know, Mrs. Wellington," Brianna said, meeting Victoria's eyes in the mirror, "we could totally modernize your look. Silver hair is so trending right now. We could give you some amazing layers, maybe add some subtle highlights. Really bring you into this century." "Thank you, dear, but I'm quite satisfied with my usual style," Victoria replied with the diplomatic grace she'd perfected during decades of political dinners, though she noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her wool skirt. Brianna's reflection smirked. Right, the usual. Got it. But there was something in the way she said it, a mockery wrapped in professional courtesy that made Victoria's chest tighten with a familiar dread. She'd heard that tone before, in the voices of young nurses who spoke to elderly patients like children, in the words of shop clerks who acted as if her money wasn't green enough. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Wellington?" Brianna asked, noticing Victoria's expression. "Of course, dear, just wool gathering." Wool gathering. Even her vocabulary marked her as obsolete. The campaign against Victoria's dignity began with small cruelties that could be dismissed as accidents or oversights. She would request her usual rose-pink nail polish, only to find her nails painted an aggressive coral that clashed violently with her skin tone. "Oops, wrong bottle," Brianna would laugh, making no effort to correct the mistake. "But coral is very youthful on you, very Miami." Her appointments grew longer and more uncomfortable. They would leave her under the dryer for 45 minutes instead of 30, claiming they'd forgotten about her while they gossiped about their weekend plans. They used water that was too hot during shampooing, rollers that pulled too tight, and products that left her scalp itching and irritated for days afterward. "You know," Madison announced one Thursday, her voice pitched just loud enough for the entire salon to hear, "my grandmother is about your age, Mrs. Wellington. She just got this amazing pixie cut. Totally took 20 years off her face. Maybe it's time to embrace change. I mean, literally, when was the last time you tried something new?" The words stung because they carried a grain of truth. When had she last tried something new? Not since Harold died 12 years ago. Not since the invitations stopped coming. Not since her world had shrunk to doctor's appointments, grocery runs, and Thursday afternoons at Eternal Beauty. Other clients began to notice. Victoria saw how conversations quieted when she entered, how heads turned to stare at the old woman who refused to modernize. She overheard whispers, "Still doing that old-fashioned style. Someone should tell her it's not 1960 anymore." Kind of sad, really. The salon that had been her sanctuary for 3 decades was transforming into her personal purgatory. But Victoria Wellington hadn't survived the social crucible of Washington politics by backing down from mean girls, regardless of their age. Each Thursday, she returned. Each Thursday, she requested chair number 3 and her usual style. Each Thursday, she endured the smirks, the eye rolls, and the deliberate incompetence with the stoic grace of someone who had learned that dignity was often its own reward. But dignity, Victoria was about to learn, was also a luxury that could be stripped away in a single afternoon. "Mrs. Wellington, I've been thinking," Brianna said, as she fastened the pink cape around Victoria's neck. "Today's the day we shake things up. Trust me on this." Every instinct Victoria had developed over 8 decades screamed at her to stand up and leave. The predatory gleam in Brianna's eyes, the way the other stylists had gathered to watch, the unusual interest from clients who normally ignored her, everything felt wrong. "I really prefer my usual, come on, live a little. You're only as old as you feel, right?" Brianna's voice carried an edge of mockery disguised as encouragement. "I'm thinking we go dramatic, really make a statement." Victoria should have trusted her instincts, should have removed the cape, paid for her time, and walked out. But she was tired. bone-deep tired of fighting for respect, of defending her right to exist as herself, of justifying her choices to people young enough to be her granddaughters. "All right," she whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. "Perhaps something subtle." Brianna's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, this will be perfect for you." The chemical smell hit Victoria's nostrils immediately. Harsh, acrid, wrong. This wasn't the gentle perm solution Martha had used. This was something industrial, something violent. "This doesn't feel right," Victoria said, her scalp beginning to burn. "That's totally normal," Ashley chimed in from the next station. "The stronger formulas can be a little intense at first. Sometimes older hair needs more aggressive treatment," Madison added helpfully, "to break down all that built-up product from decades of the same routine." Victoria watched in the mirror as Brianna applied more of the solution, working it through her hair with mechanical efficiency. The burning sensation intensified, but every time Victoria shifted uncomfortably, one of the girls would reassure her that it was completely normal and part of the process. 20 minutes later, when Brianna finally led her to the shampoo bowl, Victoria knew something was catastrophically wrong. The water that ran down the drain wasn't just cloudy. It was filled with chunks of silver hair, dissolving before her eyes like cotton candy in rain. Brianna said, her voice devoid of concern. "Looks like your hair was more damaged than we thought. Sometimes vintage hair just can't handle modern treatments." Vintage, like she was a piece of furniture from an estate sale. Back at chair number 3, Victoria stared at her reflection in mounting horror. Half her hair was gone, dissolved by whatever caustic solution Brianna had used. What remained hung in patchy, chemical-burned wisps around her scalp, which was angry red and already beginning to blister. The salon had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Victoria, some filled with genuine shock, others with poorly concealed amusement. A client in the corner raised her phone, and Victoria realized with a jolt of humiliation that she was being recorded. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Did you see her face?" A younger woman by the manicure station actually giggled, then covered her mouth when her friend elbowed her. "I'm so sorry this happened," Brianna said, her voice carrying all the sincerity of a telemarketer. "These reactions are rare, but they do occur, especially with hair that's been chemically processed for so many years. I can recommend some excellent wig shops if you'd like." Victoria sat frozen, staring at the destroyed woman in the mirror. The elegant matriarch who had hosted Supreme Court justices for dinner was gone, replaced by a broken old woman with patchy, burned hair and tears streaming down her cheeks. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and removed the cape. As she walked toward the front desk to pay, because proper ladies always paid their bills even for their own destruction, she heard Brianna's voice behind her. "Next time, maybe consider something more age-appropriate from the start." More laughter followed her into the parking lot. Victoria sat in her car for 20 minutes, sobbing into a tissue while strangers walked past her window. Some pointed, some stared. One teenager actually took a picture, but as the sun began to set and the parking lot emptied, something shifted inside Victoria Wellington. A memory surfaced from 40 years ago, Harold's voice on the night he'd been confirmed as a federal judge. "Victoria, my dear, you have more strength in your little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. The question isn't whether you can survive this. The question is what you're going to do about it." She wiped her tears, started her car, and drove home. But first, she made a phone call. "Sarah, it's Victoria Wellington. Yes, Harold's widow. I need to ask you something about your business ventures, specifically about a salon called Eternal Beauty." Victoria spent the following weeks in her late husband's study, surrounded by legal documents and laptop computers. Her arthritic fingers moved slowly across the keyboards, but her mind was sharp as the day she'd helped Harold research his most important cases. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Eternal Beauty Salon wasn't just guilty of elder abuse. They were running a sophisticated fraud operation. Elderly clients were systematically overcharged for services, charged for expensive treatments they'd never received, and in some cases, deliberately subjected to accidents that would require expensive corrective procedures. Victoria found online reviews that had been scrubbed from major sites, complaints to the Better Business Bureau that had mysteriously disappeared, and most damning of all, a private social media group where Brianna and her colleagues shared photos and videos of their elderly clients, mocking their appearances and celebrating their successful scams. But Victoria's investigation revealed something else entirely, something that made her hands shake with rage and anticipation. She opened her laptop and accessed a file she hadn't looked at in 15 years, a corporate ownership document, a deed, a series of contracts that told a story no one at Eternal Beauty knew. Victoria picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized 4 decades ago. "Sarah Morrison's office, this is Jennifer. Jennifer, this is Victoria Wellington. I need to speak with Sarah immediately. Tell her it's about the Wellington Investment Group." 5 minutes later, Sarah Morrison's voice came through the phone. Older now, successful, but still carrying the nervous energy of the young woman Victoria had mentored so many years ago. "Victoria, my God, I haven't heard from you since Harold's funeral. How are you?" "I've been better, dear. I need to ask you about your recent acquisition, Eternal Beauty Salon." Silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah, are you there? How did you—" "Victoria, that acquisition was confidential. The paperwork isn't even finalized yet." Victoria smiled for the first time in weeks. "Sarah, dear, do you remember who co-signed your first business loan 35 years ago?" Another silence, longer this time. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "The Wellington Investment Group. You're the silent partner. You've been the silent partner in all my acquisitions. 40% ownership in Morrison Beauty Enterprises, which, as of last month, includes Eternal Beauty Salon," Victoria confirmed. "I think it's time I took a more active role in management, don't you?" The following Thursday at 2 p.m., Victoria pushed through the glass doors of Eternal Beauty Salon. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her walked Sarah Morrison, successful businesswoman, beauty industry mogul, and owner of the largest chain of salons on the East Coast. Behind Sarah came 2 lawyers, a representative from the State Board of Cosmetology, a fraud investigator from the District Attorney's Office, and a woman from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division. The salon fell silent as they entered. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the authority that had built her empire. "I'm Sarah Morrison, owner of Morrison Beauty Enterprises, which, as of 30 days ago, includes this establishment." Brianna's face had gone white as a sheet. The other stylists looked around nervously, suddenly very interested in cleaning their stations. "I'd like you all to meet my business partner, Victoria Wellington," Sarah continued, gesturing to Victoria, who stood tall despite her scarf-covered head. "Mrs. Wellington has been my silent partner for 35 years. Her investment group provided the capital that launched my first salon, and her business acumen has guided every major decision in building this company." The silence in the salon was deafening. "You see," Victoria said, stepping forward, "when I started coming here 30 years ago, it wasn't as a customer. It was as an investor checking on the property I'd helped purchase. Over the years, I became genuinely fond of this place. It felt like family." Her voice hardened. "Which makes the systematic fraud, elder abuse, and deliberate assault I've documented here all the more painful." Brianna found her voice. "Assault? Are you insane? It was an accident." Victoria removed her scarf, revealing her healing scalp, where patches of new hair were beginning to grow. "Industrial-strength hair relaxer applied to previously permed hair isn't an accident, Ms. Kowalski. It's chemical assault. The FBI has very specific definitions for these things." The fraud investigator stepped forward. "We've been monitoring your social media accounts, your financial records, and your client billing practices. We have evidence of systematic fraud affecting over 200 elderly clients over the past 18 months. That's not—" Ashley started, then stopped when one of the lawyers held up a thick folder. "We also have the contents of your private social media group," Sarah said coldly. "The one where you shared photos and videos of elderly clients without consent, mocked their appearances, and celebrated successful overcharging schemes." Madison began to cry. Destiny was frantically trying to delete something on her phone. Caitlin had gone completely pale, but Victoria wasn't finished. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "The reason I could document your crimes so thoroughly is that I've been recording every appointment for the past 6 months." She pulled out a small device from her purse. "Hidden camera. Harold gave it to me years ago when he was working on surveillance cases. Amazing how technology has miniaturized." The color drained from Brianna's face. "You can't. That's illegal." "Single-party consent state," one of the lawyers said cheerfully. "Perfectly legal when you're recording crimes being committed against you." Victoria looked around the salon at the clients who had watched her humiliation, who had laughed at her pain, who had treated her like entertainment. "You all saw what happened to me," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "You watched an elderly woman being deliberately hurt, and some of you laughed. Some of you recorded it for your own amusement." The clients shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by their phones and magazines. "I want you to remember this moment," Victoria continued. "Remember that someday, if you're lucky, you'll be old too. And when that day comes, I hope you're treated with more dignity than you showed me." 3 months later, Victoria Wellington pushed through the glass doors of Eternal Beauty Salon at exactly 2 p.m. on a Thursday. But everything had changed. The salon hummed with a different energy now. The new staff, carefully vetted and trained in Sarah's comprehensive customer service program, greeted every client with genuine warmth. Young stylists worked alongside experienced professionals, creating an atmosphere where innovation and tradition coexisted respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Wellington," Maria Santos said with a smile, gesturing toward chair number 3. Maria was 45, experienced, and had come highly recommended from Sarah's flagship location in Manhattan. "How are we feeling today?" "Much better, thank you," Victoria replied, settling into her familiar chair. Her hair had grown back surprisingly well, not as thick as before, but healthy and strong. The silver strands caught the afternoon light streaming through the window as Maria began her work. "The usual style?" Maria asked, though she already knew the answer. Over the past 3 months, she'd learned that Victoria's weekly appointment was about more than hair. It was about reclaiming dignity, about healing from trauma, about proving that age was not a crime. As Maria worked, Victoria watched the autumn leaves falling outside her window. In the mirror, she could see other clients throughout the salon, women of all ages being treated with the respect and care that should be universal, but was somehow revolutionary. The criminal trials had made national news. Brianna and her colleagues were facing multiple felony charges for elder abuse, fraud, and assault. The civil lawsuits had already resulted in settlements that would fund scholarships for cosmetology students who wanted to specialize in serving older clients. But more importantly, Victoria's ordeal had sparked a conversation about ageism in the beauty industry and beyond. She'd been invited to speak at conferences, interviewed by news programs, and had even started a foundation dedicated to combating elder abuse in service industries. "Mrs. Wellington?" Maria's voice brought her back to the present. "All finished." Victoria looked at her reflection and smiled. The woman in the mirror was 82 years old, with silver hair styled in a timeless French twist and wearing her signature rose-pink lipstick. But more than that, she looked like a woman who had reclaimed her power, who had turned trauma into purpose, who had proven that dignity was not negotiable at any age. "Thank you, Maria. Same time next week?" "Of course. Chair number 3 will be waiting." As Victoria prepared to leave, she noticed a new client being led to a styling chair, an elderly woman, probably in her 70s, looking nervous and uncertain. Victoria caught her eye in the mirror and gave her an encouraging smile. The woman smiled back, and Victoria saw something precious in that exchange. Hope. The confidence that she would be treated with respect, that her choices would be honored, that her dignity would remain intact. That, Victoria thought as she walked out into the crisp afternoon air, was worth everything she'd been through. Because the most beautiful thing about getting older wasn't the wisdom or the perspective or the freedom from caring what others thought. It was the knowledge that you'd survived long enough to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and chair number 3 would always be waiting. 6 months later, Victoria Wellington sat in her late husband's study, reviewing the quarterly reports from Morrison Beauty Enterprises. The numbers were impressive. The company's focus on dignified service for clients of all ages had become a model for the industry, leading to expansion and unprecedented profitability. A knock at the door interrupted her reading. "Come in." Sarah Morrison entered carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression Victoria had learned to recognize over their decades of partnership, the look of someone with important news. "We need to talk," Sarah said, settling into Harold's old leather chair. "I just got off the phone with the producers from 60 Minutes. They want to do a follow-up story on the salon investigation." "Oh?" Victoria set down her papers. "What kind of follow-up?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying Victoria's face. "They've been digging into the background of the story, into you, into us, into the Wellington Investment Group." Victoria's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "They know, don't they?" Victoria said softly. They know that Victoria Wellington died in 1987, Sarah whispered. Car accident on I-95, coming back from her husband's funeral. They know that the woman who's been my silent partner for 35 years, who invested in my first salon, who guided my business decisions, they know that's impossible. The silence stretched between them. They know that the real Victoria Wellington never had children, never lived to see the internet age, never could have used hidden cameras or social media investigations. Sarah's voice was barely audible. They want to know who you really are. The elderly woman sitting across from her smiled. The same elegant, mysterious smile she'd worn for decades. Does it matter? She asked. The work is real. The justice was real. The changes we've made are real. But who are you? Victoria, or whoever she was, stood and walked to the window, looking out at the maple trees that were beginning to turn with the season. I'm someone who learned a long time ago that the most effective way to fight injustice is to become the person who has the power to stop it, she said. I'm someone who discovered that the best way to protect the vulnerable is to become invisible yourself, until the moment when visibility becomes a weapon. She turned back to Sarah. I'm someone who has spent 40 years building an empire of businesses that treat people with dignity, using the identity of a woman whose own dignity was cut short by tragedy. Sarah stared at her. The real Victoria Wellington. Did you know her? I was her best friend, her college roommate, the maid of honor at her wedding. When she died, I was a broke graduate student with a business degree and no prospects. I was also someone who had just witnessed the most elegant, intelligent, dignified woman I'd ever known be dismissed and ignored in the months after her husband's diagnosis, simply because she was grieving and older than the wives of his younger colleagues. The confession hung in the air between them. I knew that Victoria's vision for business, for treating people with respect and dignity, would die with her unless someone carried it forward. So I became her. I used her insurance settlement, her husband's investments, her social security number. I became the woman she would have been if she'd lived. Sarah was quiet for a long time. And the salon investigation? The abuse you suffered? Was real. Every moment of it. The humiliation, the pain, the chemical burns. All real. But it was also an opportunity, a chance to expose a systemic problem while demonstrating that even someone with power and resources can be vulnerable to abuse. Victoria sat back down, her eyes meeting Sarah's. The question now is, what are you going to do with this information? Sarah looked at the woman who had been her mentor, partner, and friend for most of her adult life. The woman who had guided her business decisions, supported her through failures and celebrated her successes, helped her build an empire based on dignity and respect. I'm going to tell 60 Minutes that they're welcome to investigate the business practices of Morrison Beauty Enterprises, Sarah said finally. I'm going to tell them that our success is based on treating every client with respect, regardless of age. And I'm going to tell them that my partner prefers to remain private, which is her right. Victoria smiled. And if they keep digging, then they'll find a 40-year track record of businesses that treat employees fairly, serve clients with dignity, and contribute to their communities. They'll find scholarship programs, charitable foundations, and industry reforms that have improved thousands of lives. Sarah leaned forward. They'll find that whoever you are, you've spent 4 decades making the world a better place. And honestly, that's the only identity that matters. Victoria Wellington, whatever her real name might be, nodded and returned to her quarterly reports. Outside the window, the maple trees continued their eternal cycle of death and rebirth, and somewhere across town, chair number 3 sat waiting for Thursday at 2 p.m. Some mysteries, Sarah realized, were more beautiful when they remained unsolved, and some identities were more real than birth certificates could ever prove.